All right. Okay, everybody, thank you for your patience. I am so excited for this episode of Rewilding the Mythic Self. I have Dr. Tamea Ryan here. She has over 20 years experience in story transformation and authentic living. Through her business, The Lived Experiences, she helps individuals break free from limiting narratives and step into lives that feel genuinely theirs. Tamia has offered two books and a workbook. She's passionate about helping people move from living someone else's story to owning their own. Just from that experience itself, it's very clear why she's a guest on this specific podcast, where it is all about reclaiming our story, our own personal folklore, and rewilding the path towards authentic living. She's going to be sharing with us a bit about a community that she's putting together for those that really want to do intentional narrative work. But Tamia, also, just myself and a few other guests, also has a clinical practice and is rewilding her own trajectory by building this side business to have, I imagine, a creative and purposeful outlet. Tamia, what sort of inspired you to start this project in particular? I'm so curious
Yes,
how, like,
thank
what
you.
seeds gave root to this.
Yes, thank you. I just want to start off first saying thank you so much for having me on the show. I am honored to be here. So thank you so much for connecting. And just to start from, I guess, the beginning, by training, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So that's really where I started in this arena of helping people. And I've worked in various sectors, working with young people and families, working in the federal sector. But in 2019, that was really a shift for me. And there was so much going on in the world during that time, 2019, 2020. You had COVID, social justice issues, which have always been at the forefront of my work, but were really being publicized more for people
Yeah.
to tap into. There was more intentional discussions regarding social justice issues. This was something that I always was passionate about, but more people were actually taking notice, right? You have social workers who are like, this stuff's been going on for years, but people were tapping in, hey, however it needs to happen, we were actually having a conversation. And so for me, it was like, I wanted to start working with people in a larger way, in a more global way. And so that's really what led me towards that shift of working towards building my coaching practice. I'm always going to draw really from that clinical background, but the coaching perspective, and sometimes people will ask, what's the difference between therapy and
Right.
coaching? And
Yeah.
so while there are some similarities, therapy is drawn on the fact that there is a diagnosis that you're
Mhm.
generally working towards, whereas coaching doesn't have that criteria. And coaching is very action oriented, very future oriented. And you do have that ability to really just work with a larger group of people. And so that's really what led me towards developing my coaching business. But in terms of storytelling, that's been something that I have always drawn from in working with clients. And it really was in my early budding years as a social worker, like 22 years old out of grad school. And I was working with young people and families who were in crisis. So I worked for a 24-hour youth shelter. And so we had young people coming for various reasons: unaccompanied youth, runaway youth, families that were in crisis, families that needed respite. And it was a very brief treatment approach. We served about 1,500 young people a year. So you can imagine there was a lot of in and out
Yeah.
and some repeat clients, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what I learned early on at 22 was how powerful our stories are. I was working with these families that were caught in these generational cycles, and they were holding on to these stories. And what I found interesting was it was often the young people, 12, 13 years old, who were saying, you know what? I don't want this to be my story anymore. I know this is how we've been living. I know this is how I grew up or was raised, but something's not right. I want something to change. And so it really was like at that point that I realized how important the stories that we hold on to, the stories we inherit, really impact our life.
Oh, it so deeply, and I think in ways that kind of sneak up on us. I think some of my colleagues in South Africa, actually, there's a scholar named Dr. Elwani Ramagundo, which I wouldn't be surprised if you would be interested in her body of work.
Yeah.
Part of what she focused her scholarship looking at families amid the progressive AIDS crisis in Africa, and children that by default were ended up being raised by their grandparents, and they talked a lot about the type of media that was being played in the different schools and things that they had. And what was fascinating about her work to me is that she was commenting from that cultural lens and perspective on what would have been my generation of kids growing up amid that particular collective trauma and pandemic. And I notice this even when I'm working in the field. I often work with a lot of people that are from Africa that have immigrated to the United States to support and serve as healthcare workers. And sometimes I like to incorporate song with my clients, especially soothing folks with dementia. And what I found is, like, for one client, I started singing something from The Sound of Music. And one of the colleagues from Kenya started singing right along with me and had grown up with the exact same, like, television from the missionary schools.
Yes.
And it brought me, like, reconnected to like how much media that I consumed growing up and how much that was such a constant, I think, in so many of our lives. And like now on a totally other level for, I'm sure, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, we are co-evolving with these narratives that are disseminated from so many different parts, and some of them that are not so shy about almost having somewhat of a nefarious purpose or intent. And I've been telling many of my clients regularly that are recovering from surgeries and things like that, that I'm almost like very medicinally concerned by how much like news they could be taken in. I think we almost have to be just as mindful of the types of narratives that we take into our bodies and our hearts as we
Yes.
do like the type of food that we're eating.
Oh, yes. And I'm just like getting excited because I truly like the impact when you think about, and those who follow me know I talk a lot about this proverbial bag. It's like this bag that when we come into the world has already been filled up sometimes. And it's like all this stuff has already been put into this bag. And what happens is, as we continue to age and evolve and have experiences, people are putting things into this bag. And it's almost like, when's the last time you went into your closet and
Mhm.
started looking at stuff that this doesn't fit anymore? Okay, I had this 10 years ago. I never wear it. And it's like we have to sit, pause, take that bag, open it up, and say, okay, what is serving me? What is no longer serving me? Oh, okay, yeah, this is an important value that I want to hold on to, but do I need to have it weighing me down all the time? Do I need to have this experience? And we come into the world many times with these stories already wrote for us, right? And we feel like we have to continue that narrative because someone said so, right? Someone told us that this is how your story should be. This is how you should feel about being a parent. This is how you should feel about whatever the situation is, right? And I do think media, as they say, it's a blessing and a curse, right?
Right.
Stories are important because they offer, I think, threefold purpose where we can heal, we can inspire others, and we can connect. But what happens in that connection piece is we start evaluating other people's narratives. And we're like, wait a minute, they look happy. Why can't I have that life? Why can't my experience be like that? And so it's really like finding that balance. But as you mentioned with young people, and it happens to adults too, because we all get caught up in the Instagram lifestyle and things, but young people are being hit with it at such an intense rate. And that is concerning.
Yeah, I like what you said about how it's a mixed bag and there's positive, like, I think so much with anything, it's how we choose to relate to it and what intention and purpose we put into it and how visible we can make it. Earlier in the podcast, part of what catalyzed this was me wanting space to just share about what has helped me, like, I guess I know that you have some relationship with academia, and I think it goes back to like the witch burnings and stuff like that, or
Right.
the, what do you call it, that era where, I don't know, the birth
Salem
of
witch trials.
rationalism or whatever
Yeah.
in the West, which gets, it has, I forget what you call it, where it's made to look a little bit more glossy and like altruistic than it was, because that
Right.
era of history came with really brutal repression of particularly folk mysticism practices,
Mm,
in particular ways that whoever could be denoted as somewhat like a wise or gifted woman in particular really
mhm,
got villainized during that era and really usurped of any of the power they held in the community through a culture of fear. What's horrific to that, to me, about the birth of the scientific, quote unquote, scientific revolution
mhm,
is it has these like toxic seeds to it, where science was also born out of repressing other forms of making meaning and building knowledge in relation to a land base. Or like, I've been a big champion for indigenous science perspectives and also reviving folk wisdom practices and like intuitive abilities. And one of the mediums of that has been like the tarot. So I've turned to the tarot and then like other like oracle decks and things just as a way
mhm,
of allowing myself with some agency to dance with some symbology or consider what these archetypes are, what different things can shape, but also in a way that it's not fixed, because I think a lot
right.
of us grew up with these narratives as if there's like one and another. Like we all know like the Disney
Mhm,
princess arc and stuff, a lot of critique about that being the one and only true path for a woman to walk down. And we've been,
mhm,
I think, millennials, Gen Z, been rightfully rebelling against the material realities of that narrative and
right.
some of sometimes the abuse cycles that get perpetuated from this. This feels like kind of a tangent. One of the things I wanted to bring in with your work and what I was saying about you sharing earlier is how powerful narrative work can be for the phenomena of internalized depression, which I imagine
Yes.
that is something you likely can speak to so directly.
Yes.
Would you be open to somewhat defining that and connecting it to the narrative work that you do?
Yeah, definitely. As a woman of color, my whole professional life has been filtered through these experiences of who people think I am, and me really taking control of, no, this is who I am. I know you have these perceptions, right? And so, like, stereotypes of the Black woman being the
Mhm.
aggressive Black woman. And it's serious because I've had experiences where I've walked into a setting and I've been like the only person of color and sometimes the only woman in the room. And once I start talking, it's, oh, she actually knows something. Or, and it's like you get these compliments, right? And
Mm.
I didn't really tap into it until I got older, where I'm like, I don't see you making these comments to my white colleagues, right? Telling them that they're articulate or that they're smart or they work so well with others. And it's really subconscious for many individuals who make these statements. And so for me, narrative work around stereotypes is huge. And I've had conversations just among like my girlfriends and my friends who are women of color, and how we would often just almost feel exhausted because we were just trying to show people like we are not who you think we are. Whether you are doing it intentionally or not, this is the burden that we have to carry. We have to show up a little bit extra, a little bit better, a little bit, work a little bit harder because we are trying to reshape that narrative. And so and that was really like, I think the pinnacle shift for me. Like, I realized I'm not doing that anymore. Like, I'm not going to try to prove to you that I don't fit your stereotype. And
Right. It
so,
ends up having this like really profound internal control on like almost every micro reaction.
yes.
We've had some conversation on the podcast so far, and like just part of my lived experience is like late diagnosed ADHD and nonverbal learning
Mhm.
disabilities. part of why I wanted to create a platform that might encourage others that live with those diagnoses or like some of the impact of being pathologized by the Western medical and mental health system in a variety of facets, which I know you would be very intimately aware, to
Yeah.
consider adding as a complement some of the archetypical and narrative or like metaphysical perspectives to help
Hmm.
reclaim relationship to maybe those traits and qualities that could be true to yourself, but maybe a little bit
Hmm.
more release to some of the projected stigma. Because what I'm hearing from you there, it connects a lot with this process of unmasking and accepting
Yes.
those part of yourself and realizing
Hmm.
I don't have to define myself in relationship to somebody who's decided of their own accord to hate me for some reason. You don't
Right.
have to let your haters win in the most intimate moments with yourself or
Exactly.
your,
Exactly.
yeah.
And I think for me, I think as I got older, it started to affect me more. Like when I was younger, I just really didn't maybe have the maturity or the understanding. And I had this naiveness, like, okay, people wouldn't think that about me. But as I started getting older, and I think once I had my first son, and I started noticing this is really like affecting me, like I'm coming to work feeling like stressed out because I have to put on this persona to prove that I'm not like what they think we're like, right? And it was at that point I said, you know what? I'm going to always be me and who I am. And I'm not going to feed into, I was feeding into the stereotype by trying to go above and beyond and show them that I wasn't this way. And it takes a physical and an emotional toll. And I always tell people, because I work with a lot of people who are struggling with making change and being consistent about it. And so when you show up different, people are going to be like, wait a minute, that's the Tamea I knew from 5 years ago who did X, Y, and Z. And so, like, how do you show up consistently being who you are? And that's a struggle I think that, I mean, we all face, right? Once we make that decision that, hey, this is me, I'm living my authentic true self, but people are now challenging that because they want the old bag.
Yeah, this cast of characters, right? Because I think that's an interesting way to consider like the systemics in our ecosystem, right? So, big part of why I was excited to see like the momentum behind your business like percolate to the surface and to make
Yeah.
an accessible offering is I told you about my other podcast, which
Mhm.
looks at I was trying to create a little bit more general public literacy of this very niche. It's like a folk band discipline called
Mhm.
occupational science and narrative plays a very foundational role in how like
Right.
that particular body of scholarship has been
Mhm.
evolving with a lot of different intersectional movements that I think like I imagine this is quite broader than this little slice of the academy
Right.
engaged in. But one of the things, and this connects to Alwani Ramagundo's work as well, in how she relates to like collective occupations. We're used to looking at the systems in
Mhm.
society as almost these like fixed, rigid structures, like as if they're built out of barbed wire and steel and are
Right.
impenetrable to being evolved in any way. Like
Mhm.
on the ground, like true physical reality, most of these systems are made up of actual people. And
Right.
from
Mhm.
these actual people that have plastic nervous systems, evolving roles across the lifespan, there's something empowering there that these myths maybe only have power over us in so much as we let them dictate our reactions.
Yes. And that is definitely a key part of in working with people. I use this framework of story awareness because without the self-awareness piece, like you're just throwing a target and you're not even looking to see where you're hitting at. You've got to tap into that self-awareness piece of, okay, first, what is the story? What is the narrative that I am following right now? And what I find is a lot of people aren't even the main characters in their stories. And so when I think about myself, yes, I'm a social worker, I'm a coach, I'm a parent, I'm this, but who is Tamea first? It's like when you talk to someone, you ask them about themselves, the first thing they launch into is their career, if they're a parent, if they're this, if they're that. And it's who are you at your core? And so like identifying like what your story is that you've been following. And I like to think in terms of patterns, not habits, because a lot of times when we think of just habits, we minimize. But like the stuff we've been carrying, it's like deep rooted patterns that we've had for years. And then that second part is really just like exploring your story, right? Exploring like how have these patterns shaped how you interact with people? How have they shaped your relationships, your career choices, your decision making? And then the last part, which is the fun part, is the story recreation. And that's where you get to now be like the main character in your story, because so many of us are living as like subplot supporting cast in our own stories. And people feel so much guilt about like being the main character. And so just like rewiring that, and when you've been carrying that for years, like it can really be challenging.
Yeah, and I think that actually connects where what I think is so lovely about those of us that are I do a lot of work with volcanoes and I love like the lore around
Yeah.
volcanoes and I think we're submerging. Actually, before I came on here, I was watching a YouTube video, The Birth of a New Island and like the
Yeah.
volcanic material. And I think some
Hmm.
of us that are breaking through the surface because for me, this is an outlet because a lot of these types of conversations, like there isn't like always like openness or readiness for
Right.
disciplines in traditional
Hmm.
practice contexts, even though obviously social work occupational therapy, this is like a robust part of our scholarship, and social workers
Hmm.
have been leaders in narrative
Yeah.
therapeutic
Hmm.
things for decades at this point. We have these narratives, like, for example, and I guess I'm maybe violating some of my intention is for this space to be like you said, like a space where it's about who is Josie at the core, detached from all
Right.
the stems, and being
Right.
able to separate from those narratives a little bit. But what was I going to say? But like to somewhat talk about clinical practice a bit,
Yeah.
I feel like we have these narratives that are like preset by the CPT codes or
Hmm.
how Medicare decided to define something. And with not much consultation with our scholarship, leaders in our field at all, these things
Right.
get defined, detached from the actual goals, what we're working on with
Hmm.
our clients, which is why, like you said, 2019 on, it's been wonderful that it's broken through to mainstream how much we have to critique the foundations
Yeah.
of the systemics of these things because all of us are not really being served by these narratives, especially about what quote unquote therapy is supposed to look like.
Right.
And I imagine like you also coming from a social work lineage, I'm sure that you've been
Hmm.
privy to conversations about how helping professions like occupational therapists and social
Yeah.
workers have been weaponized, like to separate
Hmm.
families or to
Yeah.
make even things like eugenics seem like palatable because
Hmm.
it wears like looks like a friendly school teacher is facilitating
Right.
or whatnot. And that's kind of, I think that might be triggering what I just said, but it like really
Yeah.
up levels the power of reclaiming narrative,
Mm.
how instrumental it is, because I think that's really key to how our current systems are letting us down when it comes to
Definitely.
actually accessing meaningful, transformative therapeutic supports, which is like aside to why therapists like us would be looking at developing coaching models because I imagine both of us, we don't want to facilitate harm just because the systems
Exactly.
we operate in are still attached to those narratives.
Yes. And honestly, it's why people don't access services or resources of any kind, because there are those narratives out there that once you start talking about your issues, your kids are going to be taken away or you're going to be hospitalized. And there's this fear of that. Fear of being authentic, right? A fear of sharing who you are and what your experiences are. And what I find with people is we all do it. We give ourselves labels, right? And when I think about like myself and like just transformation that I've had, I was the nice person. I was the person that always helped. I was a fixer. I would do this, I would fit it in. And it got to a point where I moved from being nice to being kind. I'm always going to be like a generous person. That's just me. But I needed to set those boundaries. And part of that was like redefining how I describe myself to other people. Like when I talk to other people, it was like, I'm the nice one, I'm this, I'm that. I took ownership of that. And maybe it was like a little bit of even ego, even though I don't feel like I'm an egotistical person, but it was like I'm the one everyone counts on, right? Like it felt good. But then I'm like, okay, but I'm burnt out. Like I can't do all of this. It's too much. And so it was like for me, and when I work with people, I try to get them just to make like a small shift. We are like conditioned as a society to look at the big picture, which is great. But as we do that, we lose focus of the process and the journey.
Like
And
where our
so,
agency is located is ultimately
yes,
in our bodies.
yes, like
Yeah.
we are like, oh, I got to get to the goal. I got to finish. I got to do this. And that's great. And I've accomplished things. I work with people who have accomplished things. But when I think of the mindset that was like, I'm like, okay, but did I even think about how I evolved over that journey, over that process? So I try to just get people to make one small change. And it sounds like a cliche of, okay, yeah, one small change. But just one change in how you interact with your experience, it makes a huge difference. And for me, like it was just, I actually just took a moment before I responded to people when they asked me to do something. It was a very small change. It felt really gross at first because I'm like used to just being like, yes, I'll do it. And I would just pause. I would say, let me check my calendar. Let me get back to you. It felt very uncomfortable for me at first. But as I started doing that, I started taking back more control of what I was allowing people to put onto my plate. And so that's one thing I always want to remind people like, it doesn't have to be this massive, like huge change. That's what we're conditioned. Like, transformation has to be like this thing that's just like totally the opposite. It doesn't have to be that. It's like this continuum of you evolving.
Definitely. And I think like that tracks with how I have been encouraged to understand how our brains and bodies connect. Yeah, you can't it's so funny. I'm trying to have these two separate podcasts, but you can probably also attest, right? Like it's part of who we are, these other
Right.
identities that we have. So it's connected to it and like also
Mhm.
having a lens of reflecting and processing it. And I think over
Right.
time, I would love it if the people who connect with this work are also trying to balance the weirdness of
Mhm.
having multiple sides and wanting, as therapists, it is so important for us to do our own work because that's the
Yeah.
powerful thing that can really allow it to feel secure for others to trust us with doing that work alongside them is knowing
Mhm.
that we've also endeavored to walk that path.
And be vulnerable to taking that cape off that we
Mhm.
feel we have to carry, especially in this arena, whether you're working in human services, healthcare, any sort of helping field. We wear this cape that we don't feel we can take off. And we know that's what leads to the burnout. That's what leads to feeling disconnected from the work. And so, for me, moving into the coaching space, because unfortunately, there are these limitations, right? Like in
Yeah.
the clinical realm. But moving into the coaching space allowed me to have those opportunities to be able to connect with people at
And to
that
keep moving
larger level.
forward. I imagine this is true with social workers as well. And if you're listening to this and you're not, maybe you're on the outside looking in, maybe you've had to work with a social worker at a hospital system or
Mm-hmm.
with your parent, or these roles and these narratives and these archetypes, like you so interact with as the consumer. And that's like a weird thing about being part of the
Right.
human health and a service system in the United States,
Mhm.
how it's clear, even those of us on the inside of it, we're very aware it's like failing all of us because we don't also love when we have to go get healthcare done and when we have to do
Yes.
we're like and that's where I think it is empowering to look at how do we reweave these things together. I'm sure maybe you've had this experience because I think we're of a similar generation of plan in terms like I know I entered the field in 2014, 2015. So I'm going into
Mm-hmm.
like decade in practice and I've noticed this from nursing as well is oftentimes, right, like the nervous system of the generation before us that often didn't have as much language as we have now, like the concept of burnout, right? That's probably
Right.
been in the mainstream lingo for maybe like bare minimum like the past 20 years.
Mhm.
Yet these stressors and these systemics have been from the beginning of the evolution of our healthcare and human service system. And sometimes the generation before you can almost say, this is our practice as if it's written on stone plates. This
Yep.
is what it is, and it can't
Hmm.
pivot. I think a lot of us, as we come into our own power and our own, even just adapting into middle age, I imagine I will
Hmm.
be attracting other people that are going into their mid to late 30s and 40s.
Yes.
And there, I think, is something really powerful to recognize like, we're the new ancestors and we're defining
Yes.
what the current generation is and can be, and why it's so important to let yourself evolve and to self offer some of your own story, because it might be time right now to think about, what do you want to pass on to the next generation? Are these the templates that you want this profession to look like, or your
Right.
positioning? And thinking outside the box, that could be just like, even if you said it's just one power, like one small shift of one clinician or where your vantage point, that can actually
Hmm.
shift the direction of your entire family system, your entire profession. That little
Yes.
very personal small thing
Hmm.
systemically could be like what
Yeah.
enables, I call this evolved living because I had some training in evolutionary biology, and like, it could just be a creature can create a whole new line of species just by trying something new that day. Oh, I'm going to
Yeah.
fly to this tree. Oh, look, there's like food here that no one's discovered before. And now,
Yeah.
thousands of years later, we have a different species of bird because that one took a little different
Yeah.
course of action and empowered themselves to do that.
Yes, I love that because, and it's funny you say that because a lot of the clients that I work with, I'm 44, I turned 44 in June, but a lot of the clients I work with are around ages 40 to 65. And so what I'm finding, and again, it's that this is what I've been carrying. This is the story that I've been told or that I inherited that I think I'm supposed to follow. And so it's like that age group where that's when we start to really feel like, wait a minute, it happens across the ages, but it's like that age group is like, people are like, wait, something's got to change. I'm not feeling this story anymore. How do I change it? And the small shift part, it's amazing because, again, we're conditioned to look at the big wins. But when I give people just one, I ask them just make one change this week. Let's identify one change that you can make and how much burden they feel has been lifted off because now, like, they haven't been giving themselves permission to change at all. And it's, oh, wait, I feel a little bit lighter because you know what? I'm not doing the same things that I used to do, even if it's just one small change. I love your approach and just connecting also the biology to it because I think that we are holding on to so much physically and we don't tap into that enough about how that impacts us. Like, the stress. And like you said, prior generations, it wasn't burnout. It was just like, hey, you do what you do, you get the good job, you get the house, you get the family. No matter what else is going on, you don't tap into any of that. You just go. But we are more in tune, I feel, as we have evolved. We're more in tune of like how things are impacting us physically, spiritually, emotionally. And while it's uncomfortable, having that understanding is going to be valuable as we continue to evolve as a
And I
society.
think necessary. I've been
Mm-hmm.
pretty transparent on this podcast and in my evolving body of work. I truly am interested in decolonizing my relationship to the mythologies that have shaped my
Mm-hmm.
ancestral story in the context of settler colonialism and whatnot. That can be very sobering to talk about, obviously,
Yeah.
yet at the same time, like, when you're engaging with narrative work and reviving these folk mystic and wisdom practices that can be activated from like really deep parts of yourselves and like your
Mm-hmm.
epigenetics. So it used to be that people viewed, funnily enough, they viewed evolutionary biology as if it's this like fixed thing. So that's
Right.
actually a really good tell of somebody is using some of the lore of evolutionary theory or like the myths of evolutionary theory to reproduce some of these harmful narratives in a way that's not in scientific integrity. The truth
Yeah.
is, in evolutionary biology and evolutionary theory, there's a lot of conjecture because we
Mm.
don't have time machines. We can't we can't go
Right.
back
Go
in
back.
time and like physically study these things. And so there's actually a lot of room for the projection of myths that like a lot of
Hmm.
the initial anthropologists and field biologists that were empowered within the academic systems, like particularly in England, is where obviously where Darwin evolved from. It came out of a discipline called natural theology, which believed and presumed that the earth was like this fourth scripture, I believe, that
Hmm.
you could understand by understanding in that like Judeo-Christian God's conception of the planet Earth, like by studying Earth, you can better know the creator through what it created for what, that creator created. Many people don't know that Darwin was actually a priest within the thing. So there's almost like this false dichotomy between this like kind of Church of England or whatnot, like evolution and the church have always been framed as at odds,
Right.
even though
Yeah.
many of the chief architects of that mythology at that time were pretty overlapping in many of their political beliefs or like
Mm-hmm.
their archetypal narratives that they want to project. I've been very critical throughout my time in relationship with my
Hmm.
training about how evolutionary theory has been used to perpetuate very harmful myths about communities of color globally. Scientific racism is a truly violent lineage. And I'm saying this as somebody that like I have really found a lot of hope in science. And part of what I love about science is this ability that we can discover new things and change and evolve our belief system over time. And
Right.
I guess I'm contextualizing this as like narrative work. It may sound like something that's just in the social sciences, but
Hmm.
it's something that as we internalize and get more mindful about how bodies make meaning of their position on the planet and we honor where those narratives evolve and grow from in the cultural context that they emerge from and celebrating that and being in cultural humility around that, these practices will actually improve our science because we want to separate how we've been enculturated, especially to relate to other cultures and communities with hatred, otherness, or disdain. That compromises our sciences, right? We're trying
Yeah.
to get to a place of at least emotional neutrality and
Hmm.
allowing some cultures to have some intactness. We don't want to impose some of our
Yeah.
agendas and beliefs from different cultures. I hope over time people can understand how harmful that can be in that
Yes.
coming from a culture of whiteness, right? I know that in my culture, like we don't love it when others come in and sort of impose their
Yeah.
beliefs on it's
Yes.
kind of a treat others how you'd like to be treated. And that can
Yeah.
start with allowing each individual, and then
Hmm.
beyond that, at the micro, meso, and macro level, allowing some agency in how we define ourselves and how we relate
Yes.
to this. That's what it's such a powerful and fundamental work. And I'm so glad that Tamia, you're making accessible entry points to this, that you don't have to
Yes.
go like hundreds of thousands of dollars in
Oh,
additional
yes.
academic debt just to even be like present for the conversation about it.
Yes. Yes. And you're right. And everything you're saying is, I'm just wagging my head agreeing with it because that narrative of fear, like that is brought in very early. Children aren't raised or come out of the womb feeling afraid of someone from another color. Those sort of beliefs have been instilled through society. It may not be, it's not always their parents or their caregivers that are instilling it. It's also just society. We are conditioned again. We have all these conditions that have been put on us to fear someone that doesn't look like you. I'm so glad we moved away from saying I'm colorblind. And I have a conversation like this probably once a year with someone who is, I'm colorblind. And it's like, I don't want you to be colorblind. I want you to see who I am. And I want you to understand my perspective just as I'm going to understand your perspective. We don't have to pretend like we are the same. That's the other extreme, because when we find out that we're not the same, then it's conflict, right? So let's start off by saying we are unique, we are different, we have different experiences, and let's appreciate that. And I think that moving away from the colorblind approach, like to me, has been like just a huge step forward. And I know there's still people who grapple onto it because it feels safe, it feels nice, it feels like you're doing the right thing. But it's okay to understand and appreciate the differences that we have.
Yeah, the way that this has transpired in actually my academic work, which kind of intersects with aspects of this podcast as well.
Yeah.
And you would probably enjoy this conversation on my other podcast with my
Yes.
collaborator, Dr. Gian Jones. She's a hip hop scholar. And
Mhm.
our work wove together in terms of, so when I was writing, I was doing kind of disruptive writing to challenge too, like textbooks, right? They have these very like predetermined format for information
Mhm.
dissemination. And I'm sure that people who listen to this, and part of why I'm producing this on Substack, is I'm sure there's a lot of other academic people. And big part of this is me deinstitutionalizing myself from the academy because
Yeah.
there's all sorts of ways in which that system hasn't really served my body, mind, and spirit, or something that I
Mhm.
want to define a new relationship to. But I invited her to be part of the textbook because she was already doing a lot of work with like hip hop poetics and like ways to translate information that way. And I was taking a stab at academic poetry because poetry, you can just convey like part of narrative, the power of narrative is you can very quickly instill a lot of things that would maybe take you hundreds of papers to articulate the nuance of it. You can distill in a narrative
Mhm.
in 30 seconds. Like it contains so much value in the
Yes.
molecules of these narratives. But she actually, part of it is she's reclaimed her hip hop identity within the context of the academy as an asset rather than a liability, and to
Mm.
resist assimilation within these academic structures as a part of a pathway of making these academic spaces more friendly to a diversity of community means that a diversity of cultures, like it's
Mhm.
an asset to reflect that and create safety in that. Where was I going with this? But we looked at we actually just got accepted for AOTA. I'm really excited about this, that this work will go somewhere. But I looked at the lens of how quilting has evolved as an art form, has all these ways that kind of correlate with the evolution of hip hop. And
Mhm.
being able to find communities that would normally be separate, or like,
Yeah.
certainly with quilting, there are aspects that have reinforced narratives of white supremacy, which I want to say, as somebody that comes from settler colonial whiteness, this idea of color blindness is actually like almost hurt us like the deepest
Yes.
because we lose our connection to our roots and our culture in whiteness. It just erases all of this lineage and all this folklore. And even having Gion reclaim those parts of herself as like worthy and valid and separated and part of why she's adding value to her institution, it
Mhm.
also gave me permission to look at my own ancestry and look at, wow, no, my ancestors have been communicating in poetry for thousands of years. This isn't
Mhm.
even something I got to be walking on eggshells because I'm still walking with the
Right.
pathway of my ancestors and connecting and making space and not making this one right way. It can
Mhm.
liberate those of us too that are maybe on the other half of the continuum as we unravel these narratives. We can
Right.
create the context of collective liberation where it's not just about one person or one type of
Mhm.
identity having agency in a culture. We're making space for all of us.
Yes. And the continuum part, that is key, because we're not bound to just one part of our story, or whether that is, like you mentioned, our ancestors' stories. We can learn from that. We can unpack it and their experiences, but that doesn't have to define who we are. We can take parts of that. There's other parts we can say, okay, this doesn't serve me, right? And just be okay with that.
Yes, evolve living. And as I said in a previous one, in my own ancestral work, is realizing like what was so fundamentally inspiring to me about how my ancestors related to myth was that they constructed mythological narratives and empowerment and imagining for futures before they even exist. So there's like
Mm,
definitely a lot of mysticism around Scandinavian lore. But what I
yeah.
love about it is that they concocted these narratives about each other and they made it like very human and very ordinary. And that's what I'm hoping to help give diverse folks, and especially those of us like from whiteness, our healing
Yeah.
is so necessary for recalibrating how we relate systemically and having the support for context just Tamia has put together. I'm hoping that those that are
Yeah.
compelled by this body of work, I really encourage you to work with a diversity of teachers. I think Tamia has a new community that she's just launched in the last month or two. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that
Yes.
community?
Yes. So this is the Lived Experience Circle. And this is a monthly group that I just launched in September. So we're still building our founding members, but it's an opportunity to come in, connect with other individuals who may feel stuck in their story. You might want to rewrite a chapter. You might want to throw out the whole thing and start over. That's fine. You may not be clear or sure yet, but you just know you want change. That's fine as well. And so it's a community we're building. You do get access to a monthly coaching call where we come together. I have tons of resources. You have access to all my courses that I've built. And I'm just excited to continue to bring people in and build those connections. You can actually go to my website, which is thelivedexp.com. And so go there. You can sign up for my mailing list. I have a lot of freebies, a lot of things that I give out on my mailing list. But if you're looking for more of that personal touch, check out the membership.
Yeah, I want to encourage you guys to check out the membership because I think that I think where I think our work might be symbiotic and like differentiate is definitely as I get things off the ground, it's going to be very art based, very much let's see what supports get us to write poetry and create
Mhm.
collages and things like that. It's maybe not going to go in the same depth of really getting into the nuts and bolts of narrative work. I highly recommend Tamia's, she's multiple guidebooks, including one that will be made available for free in the description. And I'll definitely have her
Yes.
website in the description for any of you that want to kind of touch base. She has her own podcast as well, but I think she's our kind of resident expert on working with these powerful narrative tools that I'm not an expert in by any means, but want to role model engaging with it and building collaborations across difference too. It's so important. I'm a big ambassador for interdisciplinary collaboration and thinking outside of like just one box that you've been trained to see the world, because I think that's a big part of the challenges that we have navigating our current climate is we really need this intersectional solidarity. We need to create space where we listen to each other and find commonalities that help us move in aligned action for the well-being of all. And that takes actively stepping outside of our comfort zones and making space to be surprised by the unknown, the unexpected, and seeing, I know in our field sometimes when another field has a commonality, it can almost be triggering because we fear like, oh, am I going to be replaced by this other field in
Mhm.
capitalism because others are having these conversations, which if we could
Yes.
step back from the emotions of that, well, narrative work, I think we literally, as many people as we get doing narrative work and rewilding their internal selves, the more possibilities happen for all of us.
Yes.
And that means that there's space for all of us to have our distinct expertise, our own walk of
Mhm.
life. So I hope that those of you that are listening can start to find that here. I have a feeling that Tamia and I will be really long-term enthusiastic about each other's work and seeing it spread.
Yes.
And I think this is such a rare opportunity to get to tap into this really vital transformative force at such an accessible price point too. If you can get in on the founding members rate for the community,
Yes.
it's $37 currently. Is that
Yes, $37, and you get the monthly coaching call, resources. I think I have 5 workbooks in there right now. So I try to add a lot of value and make it accessible for people because, again, I want people to continue to evolve. I want to continue to evolve.
yeah,
I learn from you all as well. So please feel
totally.
free to reach out if you have any questions. And thank you so much for
Yes.
allowing me to be on their platform.
Oh, thank you so much for the medicine and finding your power and your confidence and creating those ripple effects that are so transformative. Just being, we still need the being visible as a business owner of color and as a
Mhm.
woman-led. That is such transformative medicine, and I am excited to support that rippling
Thank
beyond
you.
you. Just real quick before we end off, I'm hoping to actually maybe on my other podcast or this one, I want to thank and honor the life and legacy of Jane Goodall, who really
Yes.
offered that to me as a young female field biologist, the backlash that she received through her entire life for
Mm.
daring to validate her own perspective, her own intuition, and offering agencies to non-humans and seeing and cultivating what could be possible from scientific work that humanized not just other humans and communities around the world, but also our connection to the non-human landscape and their subjective experience in making that matter. Her ripple effect of her bravery has transformed the planet and thousands of lives just to dare to believe herself and commit to a body of work that aligned to her values. And I just want to honor that and let that inspire all of us that come into these systems from what's considered a more marginal perspective, and know that as we come together and celebrate each other, we do have the context that can transform our relationship to this planet. You're an important part of it. Thank you for being a
Thank
listener,
you.
and
Thank
you're
you.
welcome into our community here.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to have you on my podcast
Yeah,
too, and for
let's
you
do
to
it.
teach my listeners as well. So thank you again.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend and just sending contentment, grace, and permission to be a little bit more of yourself today for everybody that's listening. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.